explain it in Chinese, maybe. I'm not gonna explain this. By turning prostitution into modern sex work, it's not simply, by calling prostitution sex work, okay, today's topic, I don't dogmatically assume its nature as any other ordinary work. In fact, today I will demonstrate that prostitution or sex work is essentially the same as any other modern labor or service job. Or to put it another way, I'll demonstrate how and what people do to turn the oldest profession, which is selling sex, into a modern profession. But turning prostitution into modern sex work is not simply prostitutes or their customers doing. There are greater forces at work, pushing and making people to become modern subjects. In other words, modern institutions and a lot of modern tendencies and principles, or to describe this by one English word, modernity, constitute our essence, our consciousness, our behavior as modern subjects. We are all modern men, and prostitutes are no exception, at least in many modern societies. Including prostitutes, we are all made and shaped by modernity, and making and shaping modernity at the same time. One of the important pillars of modernity is the modern individual, first and foremost characterized by the equality in legal status. As a premise of this equality, the modern individual possesses his sense of self as a person with dignity and moral worth. And consequently, the modern individual possesses his private self in terms of having control to maintain the body boundary, psychological security, and the threshold of shame and embarrassment during his encounter or interaction with others, and especially working, laboring, or serving for others. So we have two important situations in daily life concerning the integrity of our personality as a modern individual. One is interacting, encountering, or socializing with others, and another is in the working situation concerning working condition. Okay, I'll call the former situation as interaction situation, and the latter is working situation. And the two situations just mentioned are not separable in service job, in which the content of working is predominantly interacting with customers or clients. Service work is, in fact, the labor of interaction. Modern service job practice, informed by knowledge systems such as business administration or business management, has developed many common routines, disciplines, and techniques to facilitate the labor process, and widely employed by all kinds of service jobs across the board. For example, service labor are often time-bound, so that every move in the labor process has been allocated an almost definite duration of time, and hence the process is very much routinized. Many of the modern sex work have also adopted this practice. Now, it's true that the time-bound routine is most often seen in the standardized service industry and not in high-end service work, where customers won't be rushed and enjoy an atmosphere to take your time, easiness. However, even in high-end service work, all good things come to an end. Arguably, there's always an implicit time bound, not noticeably imposed by the service crew, but implicitly observed by the high-end customers with self-constraint. The last point mentioned about illustrate the interaction aspect in service work, in which the customer also takes part to smoothly complete the labor process. For example, you go to a fast food restaurant. At the front counter, the order taker asks what you want. At this point, it's your turn to make a move. That is a reply within a reasonable interval of time in order to complete the labor process. Customers' indecisiveness will not help the smoothness of the process. Because of the interactive nature of service work, customers doing and saying is also part of the labor process. Sometimes we imagine a perfect service, meaning customers don't have to lift a finger. But in reality, customers have to take turns in responding. You assume civilized demeanor to maintain the quiet atmosphere and even to perform emotional labor such as smiling back to the service worker. Customers, in effect, have also been disciplined to, in subtle ways, to comply and to cooperate. Now, I have to tell you guys at this point what I'm getting at, because you probably wonder why I'm talking about all this, right? In my book, I demonstrate that many of the features of the labor process of modern service work also appear in the labor process of modern sex work. So there will be a parallel between the ordinary or the regular, the normal service work and sex work. The significance of this parallel is captured by a slogan sometimes used in prostitute movement, which says, sex work is work. In what follows, I will tell you the purpose of showing the parallel is to argue that sex worker can, as other kinds of service worker, likewise maintain her private self, her integrity and dignity in her work, in her interaction with the client. Because my book's written probably in a more systematic way, which is not easy translated into colloquial form. So today I can only present my case in a selected manner so that you can get a drift of my argument, all right? And I will only talk about typical cases for pedagogical purpose, and will not get into the twists and turns of the real life situation. So it may appear as oversimplified. Just now I mentioned in service jobs that there are two almost inseparable situations, interacting and working. And in the working situation, a common practice are informed by knowledge and skill derived from the disciplines such as business management, right, as mentioned. As to the interaction situation, American sociologist Erving Goffman, actually I think I want to thank James, right? You correct me him as Canadian American sociologist. Yes, he was Canadian before he became American, right? So Canadian American Erving Goffman, okay, sociologist. He elaborated an almost comprehensive account based on his observation of post-war American middle-class men's social behavior, especially in the face-to-face interaction, which nonetheless has some universal validity. If not exaggerate, my theory presented today can be said to be a Goffmanian analysis of sex work. But it's not gonna be my purpose today to introduce Goffman's oeuvre or even to sketch his theory. I will only use his analysis of what seems to be significant to the working condition of sex work. However, I want to emphasize that Goffman himself has never applied his theory on the prostitution phenomenon. I doubt he ever had the intention to do so. Okay, before I get into the detail of my Goffmanian interpretive analysis of sex work, I want to say more about the claim that the sex worker can maintain her private self, her integrity and dignity in her work, by introducing the concept of alienation of the self. To begin with, let me talk about the self in a simplified manner. In my view, the self has two moments, the private self and the public, or anonymous self. Okay, you see the diagram. The private self is the self present to the intimate others. Okay. 这个隐私的自我是你在你亲密 的人的前面的那一种表现。Like, you can before when you present yourself to the intimate person, you can poke your nose and try which one, right? Things like that. And the public or anonymous self is the self presented to the public or strangers. However, since there are people neither strangers nor acquaintances, sometimes I want to present myself to the intimate as a stranger. Okay, right? You understand that situation, right? And to treat strangers as acquaintances, the boundary between the public self and the anonymous self, as well as the boundary between the self and the other, are permeable and require constant maintenance. Okay. For example, right now in a publication, I'm presenting myself as an anonymous author to you. But at times, maybe I will reveal my private self, just to gain your favorable impression of me. 不然来个卖个萌，卖萌 ，being cute, at the risk of making a scene of myself because perhaps overdoing it. In any event, the self is certainly not in a maintenance-free condition. When the maintenance of self fails or in a pathologically under-siege condition, you always think, oh, am I revealing myself too much or am I whatever? And then the alienation of self befalls. To simplify my talk today, I will talk as if the alienation of self and the maintenance of self I'll talk as if the alienation of self and the maintenance of self were diametrically opposed. The failure of maintenance of self means the alienation of self. I'll just to simplify that. In what follows, I will explain my usage of the concept of alienation in 3 steps, including the purpose of talking about alienation. First, a major objection to the idea of prostitution as any other service work is that prostitution is not only selling a service for body, but for body use, but selling out oneself. That is, selling the inner self or the very person per se. In Chinese, people used to say prostitutes sell out their souls. 出卖灵魂. In Western philosophy, this is the problem of alienation of self. The dictionary meaning of alienation means, for one thing, the selling or giving away your property. So it has the meaning of separation because when you transfer your property to others, you are separate from the things that you were owned by you or close to you. So alienation could also mean separation from people you used to close to, who later become indifferent or even hostile to you. Alienation of self hence means that one is strange to himself. One is no longer the owner of himself, one is being used as an object, not a person. The latter use of the word can be traced back to Hegel and Marx, the German philosopher. Okay? And the word gains currency later in social psychology to describe a state of meaningless and isolation of modern individual. In any event, alienation in today's talk will broadly include robbing of dignity, losing self-autonomy, invading privacy, violating the body's boundary against one's will, and so on. Rape and continuous labor by coercion are the extreme forms of alienation I'm talking about today. Prevention of alienation is the effort of maintenance of one's private self. Secondly, I'm still talking expanding the alienation. Alienation in prostitution or sex work is certainly a possibility. So it certainly could happen in the process of sex work. However, alienation in any kind of work is also a possibility. In fact, this is exactly what Karl Marx has critiqued of labor under capitalism. Marx thinks work in capitalism is inevitably alienated. That is, workers' alienation of his labor power will inevitably lead to the alienation of self. Today, I will put Marx's theoretical assumption aside and deal only with the position that sex work tends to cause alienation, but not the normal work. I will demonstrate, however, the mechanism and techniques of interaction in the regular or normal labor process that prevent alienation of the worker are also deployed by sex work. Thirdly, the central question I want to ask and answer today is, why or why not is selling one's sex alienating oneself? This question can be traced back to a more general question which Hegel and others were concerned when paid labor become prevalent. That is, why or why not is selling one's labor power or self-alienate or service alienating oneself. So today I'm not going back to Marx tradition, but to early Hegel tradition. Like sex work, various types of modern work, especially in their emerging stage or in their informal sector, are also full of risk of alienating oneself in the form of privacy, encroached, a boundary of intimacy violate, or the self-appropriate. Okay. This needs a little elaboration. One of the benchmarks of modernity is the prevalence of higher labor or pay labor, which means working, laboring, or serving for others for only a period of time while maintaining legally personal autonomy, witnessed by labor contract, assuming the equality of the two parties, the boss and the worker. However, in Hegel's time, labor conditions are harsh and modern labor is suspect of just a new form of slavery. Thus, Hegel once gave an example of alienation as non-stop forced labor. The fact that alienation seldom occurs in today's normal work is largely credited to the legal protection of workers' personal integrity, autonomy, and equality. But this view overlooks the mechanism, apparatus, techniques, and organization of the labor process that directly contribute to the prevention of alienation of workers, especially in service work, of which sex service work is a type. Alienation befalls occasionally, even in today's normal service work, to either customers or service worker in the form of feeling embarrassed, humiliated, shamed, abused, violated, enraged, debased, objectified, discriminated, and so on, providing us an angle to observe sex work, service work. To understand exactly how the alienation of self in question proceeds, the approach of social interaction instead of philosophy is required. As my speech shall demonstrate, through the techniques of self-presentation during the actual human interaction. Some will say it's through the direct struggle on the side of labor process. The private self of the service worker is or is not alienated. My strategy is to illustrate that in order to prevent alienation of self, the same techniques of self-presentation in normal sex service work occur in sex service as well. In that sense, modern sex work is not different from other modern service work, and the risk of alienation is prevented or preventable. Sex work, after all, just work. In sum, for what I would call phenomenon of alienation of self during the interaction of sex work, Canadian-American sociologist Erving Goffman's writing proves the most relevant interpretive framework. Provide the most relevant framework. However, this Goffmanian approach to the question of alienation of sex work self still needs to be located in a wider context concerning the dynamics and structural condition of the modern self and its formation. In other words, the sex worker's success in not alienating herself during the interaction is not due to the personal idiosyncrasy, but deeply rooted in the conditions of modernity. Or due to the limit of time, I will just mention in passing these conditions at the end of my talk. In the end, I will also give a brief self-criticism of my analysis in light of my recent reflection on multiple modernities. Okay, so far it's all very abstract. Below, hopefully I will be more concrete discussion illustrating how sex workers avoid alienation situation in face-to-face interaction by employing the above-mentioned sociologist Goffman's observation. The interaction, or more straightforwardly, the intercourse between the sex worker and her client is the immediate source of alienation and will be our initial focus of discussion. Intercourse is usually a very intimate interaction in which my body is assessed by the other, and consequently or supposedly my private self is appropriated by the other party. Appropriation of the self and possession of the body during intercourse could happen as unilateral or mutual. Many people, especially some feminists, believe that if two persons don't stand in a long-term intimate relationship, or a genuine mutual respect relationship, the act of penetration of woman by man, especially in a commercial context, will be an act of exploitation and causing the alienation of women, in the sense that the personhood or the private self of the woman is appropriate, demeaned, and objectified. However, in actual intercourse, there are ways of techniques and of interaction that prevent this man appropriating woman scenario from happening. So what are the exact techniques of interaction in presentation and maintenance of self in sex work? I like to say coming from two sources, Goffman and the business manager. I will first explain Goffmanian's technique of interaction, which can be classified into 5 clusters. Okay? So readers can see there are disengagement and involvement of interaction, gaze, role playing, the cynical performer, audience segregation, interrogation of subpassive. Okay. When I say all this, I probably would not that I won't be too explicit about the sexual scene, so you have to think about it. No. Okay. The first cluster of these techniques can be generally labeled as disengagement from interaction. And it can be further distinguished into 5 types. Okay. These techniques, all drawn from Goffman, generally would jeopardize the social or sexual interaction and compromise the original purpose of interaction. In other words, disengagement from the interaction may very well nullify the alienation effect of the interaction by disrupting or distancing from the interaction. The first type of disengagement from interaction is external preoccupation. That is, the sex worker has divided attention during the intercourse. External preoccupation in general will foil the purpose of interaction or dwindle the effect of interaction. External preoccupation on purpose in social or sexual interaction usually means disrespect of the interaction or even disrespect of the other party. When the prostitute is not into it, the client cannot henceforth possess or appropriate the personhood of the prostitute by having sexual interaction with her, since she's not really participating in the interaction. The second type of disengagement from interaction is self-consciousness. That is, one pay very much attention on his part of the interaction, making sure his appearance, attitude, expression, movement, voice, gesture, and so on can project certain image of itself or meet the demand of the other party. The motives are varied. Goffman offers a general explanation of the occurrence of self-consciousness during the interaction. He says, I quote, when the definition of self is threatened, the individual typically withdraws attention from the interaction in a hurried effort to correct what the incident that has occurred. If the incident threatens to lower his standing and damage or discredit his self-image in some way, then flight into self-consciousness may be a way of protecting the self and licking its wounds. So Goffman thinks that, for example, when one's self-esteem is threatened during the interaction, one could become self-conscious. We can imagine that when a customer shows contempt for the prostitute during the interaction, the prostitute may sink into self-consciousness. But I suspect this would often happen, especially for the sophisticated professional sex workers. But when a novice customer has, for example, a deformed body or less impressive equipment, understandably, he will be self-conscious during the interaction. The third type of disengagement from interaction is interaction consciousness, and the fourth type is other consciousness. These are not difficult to understand. The former happens when the sex worker or the client does not immerse into the intercourse, but pay much attention, for example, to the maintenance of the atmosphere and the flow of intercourse. The latter, on the other hand, happens when the prostitute or client improperly pay attention to the other party because of suspecting the other, for example, in a certain creepy condition. There's a commonality among the four types of situation. They are all lack what is essential for a successful interaction, that is involvement. We have to involve in interaction rather than disengage from it. Alienation of self in the interaction of sex service work depends on mutual involvement. A successful alienation in commercial sex depends on successful interaction, but it's all too easy to engage from interaction and thus create insufficient involvement. The remedy to get involved, however, is not a cure, but it might get over-involvement, which is the fifth type of disengagement from interaction. So when a prostitute is over-involving in the interaction, performing just like a hooker, it may trigger the uneasiness of the customer. Perhaps the prostitute really enjoys the interaction and is not faking it, but the over-involvement will put the customer on alert and subsequently become other consciousness. The final point reveals the interconnectedness of 5 types of disengagement from interaction. One type will most likely lead to another. For example, when the client gets over-involved in the sexual interaction, the prostitute may be concerned with the ability of self-control of the client and thus become other conscious. Prostitutes' other consciousness in the interaction, implying a not so positive evaluation of the client, threatens the self-definition of the client and thus cause him become self-conscious. Now the interaction appear precarious and nearly break down. Concerns over interaction or attempts to save the interaction make the prostitute or the client interaction conscious, which is the last straw. More complication about the above-mentioned situation of disengagement and interaction, but let us skip them. Before leaving this topic, I have a couple of concluding remarks to make. First, The interaction techniques require no schooling. They come to us naturally. When the client tries to appropriate or invade private self of the prostitute during interaction, the unwilling prostitute would or could naturally evade the client's effort by disengaging from the interaction. Secondly, to preserve her self-integrity, the prostitute does not need to always resort to disengagement from interaction. There are many different sorts of techniques, mechanisms, rules, and institutions to facilitate this interaction or service, making it smooth, efficient, friendly, and normalized, in which the private self of prostitute and client are sheltered against unexpected breaches. This is the topic I'm about to get into next. Let me move on to the next cluster of Goffmanian's technique of interaction. Gaze. Gaze sometimes could be threatening. Sorry. Gaze sometimes could be threatening. Feminists would think that the male gaze is a means of invading, controlling, and possessing of the self of woman. However, most of the prostitutes can operate as a gaze black hole, as if she's wearing a non-reflective sunglass. In other words, prostitutes, sometimes pretty women or celebrities as well, are capable of not responding to the gaze. The aggressive power of gaze depends on the response or reaction of the one being gazed. If the power of the gaze is sucked into the gaze black hole, then gaze will not affect, and there's no power at all. The next topic is about the role-playing and cynical performer. The prostitute knows she's not a prostitute, the stereotype role that society assigned to her. What she performs in front of the client is just performance, and she has seen it all. The prostitute therefore plays a role in interaction as a cynical performer. It is the client who will not allow the prostitute to be sincere. Just like a doctor is led into serving placebo on the demand of disease-anxious, otherwise healthy patient. Okay? 比如说医生开处方，然后这个病人很紧张，就是一直希望医生能够开处方给他治他的病，治他没有病。这时候的医生呢，也就开一个安慰剂给他。这时候其实这个医生就是在这样一个 cynical performer 的情况。The person is not into his role because he knows in and out, he knows all this is just bullshit. Goffman points out that cynical performer can use this cynicism as a means of insulating their inner selves from contact with the audience. By audience, he means the people with whom we are interacting. In any event, the inner self of the sex worker is not easily accessible because of her role-playing as a cynical performer. Furthermore, the client could also be a cynical performer when he, for example, is in truth an undercover or policeman in a sting operation. Okay, the fourth cluster is audience segregation. Remember that by audience I mean those who are involved in interaction. Sex workers generally only serve strangers, not people from the past or acquaintances from normal life. It's a common practice that prostitutes go to another city, another country to work, to turn tricks. The practice of audience segregation is a way to preserve privacy, the private self. The same technique happens in ordinary life as well. Women who usually do not want to see a male gynecologist who happen to be friends of herself or her husband. Like what I stressed earlier, the Goffmanian interaction techniques are not unique to sex work, but are quite common in everyday life and are not employed by the performer alone. Audience would like to participate too, as in this case, maintaining the segregation. Okay. Derogation of the accent. The last cluster of Goffmanian technique of interaction is a common phenomenon as audience segregation in social interaction, especially in the service industry. To put it simply, service workers say bad words about their customers behind their back, and the customer will do the same as well. Goffman says, such derogation serve to maintain the solidarity of the team, demonstrating mutual regard at the expense of those absent and compensating perhaps for the loss of self-respect that may occur when the audience must be accorded accommodated face-to-face treatment. In Goffman's view, derogation of accent is more like a compensation mechanism. When a person or a team is not respected in the presence of the audience, the person or the team can get even by derogating the absent audience to maintain the dignity of self and morale of the team. So sex workers behind their customers' back would give nicknames and laugh at them, grudging about their animal-like behavior, their dehumanizing attitude, their patriarch domination, exploitation, and so on. Likewise, the customers call prostitutes whores and use insulting words behind their back. So far, I have demonstrated ordinary techniques used in everyday social interaction that can thwart possible alienation in sex work and help maintain the private self of the prostitute. Now I want to move into another category, which may partly originate from the technique of social interaction, but has transformed under the influence of rationalization of modernity into managerial mechanism or disciplinary techniques of modern organization. These diverse techniques will roughly classify into three sets for intuitive grasp. They are routine or routinization, surveillance, and miscellaneous. Many of the managerial mechanisms or disciplinary techniques of modern organization are not targeting the worker, but also the customers, assuming the equality of both parties and motivating both parties' agency, spontaneity, self-monitoring, and self-discipline. So I would think this is the difference between postmodern and early modern, when the customer is still God and service worker is the servant of the master. The first set of managerial mechanism or disciplinary techniques is about routine or routinization, which is a general term for various mechanisms and techniques with different compositions. Some routines were formulaic, stubbornly by the book, or going through the motion. But others are smooth, improvising, and participatory, inducing a sense of security and trust. Routinization is the mechanism or techniques that can not only protect the self of the service worker and their customers from alienation, but also standardize the labor process. Let me list the ways of organizing routine so that you can have a rough idea. Okay, work routine implies that the service work, by its nature, a performance or a theater according to the pre-written scripts. In other words, when one is working, the day-by-day routine hold back his private self, which recedes into an anonymous state in the presentation of self. Putting out a public face with perhaps a personal touch or idiosyncratic trait for sure, but he nonetheless can no longer do or be whatever he wants. The show must go on, and let's see how it works. Every performance has a beginning. The announcement of let the show begin is necessary, and most importantly, is a part of the routine. Even if the routine is a great show, the performance cannot last forever, right? Everything must come to an end. So every routine of interaction has a beginning and an end as a routine. When a model poses for Ning, she does not undress in front of the audience, but appears all of a sudden, marking the beginning of the job. Prostitute in Taipei, I'm talking about Taipei prostitute, used to begin the routine by holding a wash bowl to enter the working room, and to end the routine by taking the wash bowl away. The marking of the beginning and the end is ritualistic, and the routine is episodic. And the next episode will be the next customer, and so on. Routine interaction itself presupposes both parties understand the meaning of the present situation or context, right? So we have the framing. How many times I have?
2 more.
10 minutes, okay. Maybe I want to skip some of these because like taking turns, I think I mentioned in active participation, yeah, right. Save some time. I just want to say just one thing. There are many other different types of routine, but one thing I just mentioned briefly is about just like hooker. Okay. I think we can get a driven from the description on the way I described it. Now, so far we talk as if the sex worker is always on the defense, maintaining and protecting herself from the alienation during the interaction of the labor process. But sophisticated veteran prostitutes are aggressive and capable of handling the possibility of alienation. Some of them don't need to hide their identity, or they hide in the light. After work, they don't change into a normal person living in the private realm, but go around acting, talking, dressing just like a hooker. So prostitutes, just like any group of people, are much diversified, and thus would employ divergent or even contrary strategies to cope with alienation in interaction with the customer or other audience. There are still many other managerial mechanisms or listening techniques that we don't have time to discuss today. But I think you probably get essential ideas. Now I want to draw a brief conclusion from the above discussion. Okay. I hope I have shown basically the sex workers' alienation is less likely to originate from the interaction with the client. In a way, this is understandable, for no service work can go on in the long run if alienation always accompanies the interaction process. The service worker can, in one way or the other, evade the looming alienation. However, the alienation does not necessarily take place on the site of face-to-face interaction. Leaving the brothel, going back to one's apartment, the prostitute has no escape from the stigma. The stigma is, of course, a possible source of alienation of prostitution profession. However, the stigma of prostitution is not a coherent ironclad, similar to the stigma of homosexuality, which is a mixture of ideas that may change over time. Public opinion awareness of the reality of prostitute work and life can affect the sensitivity of stigma. I hope my speech today can not just throw some new light on the issue of prostitution, but also change some preconception that may cause the stigma of prostitution. Prostitutes' ability to cope with alienation and preemptive mechanisms and techniques of sex work to fend off the looming alienation in the labor process are originate, grounded, and sustained in the wider context of condition of modernity. Well, maybe I'll just skip this part. Right? Because, interaction doesn't happen in a vacuum. Right? There's always a wider context, and we don't have time to go into that because they're going to be totally a different lecture. Okay. Right. My book was published in 2004, 15 years ago. What do I think about the argument in my book now? I still consider some interesting contribution, especially to the unexpected interpretation of Erving Goffman. However, politically, my theorizing of modernity fits in too much with the upbeat post-Cold War milieu, that is globalization under unipolar modernization. Okay, to put into a slogan, it would be something like one world, one modernity. However, around the turn of millennium, post-colonial critique of Eurocentrism and the crossfire between the end of history and the clash of civilizations seems pretty reasonable that have all landed on the claim of multiple modernities. Multiple modernities means the Western modernity is not the only modernity. There are multiple modernities, each having its own civilizational basis. My own position is different from the multiple modernities, but sharing the outlook of the rejection of singular modernity and its marginalization theory. In light of the new reflection on modernity, I will add to my original project two new aspects. The first aspect is more social-cultural specific, noticing the difference of interaction strategies and rituals between, for example, Japanese and Chinese society. Specifically, I will put more emphasis on not just alienation-related issues, but other values such as what Chinese would call face-saving, 面子, 人情, 人情的状态, 人情. Something could infringe on the right and its rigid boundary in legal discourse. The second aspect, if I cannot rewrite them, will be paying more attention to the traditional strategy and ritual of interaction, functioning in the defense of one's faith and interest. A good example is that a few years back, several Taipei prostitutes encountered a feminist NGO advocating the punishment of applying sex in front of Taipei's legislation office. So you have a few Taipei prostitutes encounter another group of feminists. And these prostitutes kneeled to the group of feminists and begged for mercy. Okay, they kneeled down actually. Okay. Kneeling down and begging for mercy or forgiveness is a tradition in East Asia and occasionally practiced even today. Prostitutes' move seems to be losing faith and dignity. Right? You kneel down. But those feminists knew better. Okay, after all, they are Chinese. They fled in panic. And the prostitute then quickly stood up, chasing and disparaging the fleeing feminists. Okay. So kneeling down to the superior or authority does not necessarily mean subordination, as in the Orientalist Oriental imagination of Oriental despotism. East Asia has also a long tradition of 刁民. 刁民means insubordinate people to whom kneeling down is a strategic move with multiple meanings, awaiting to seize the most favorable moment and outcome. So this traditional strategy was exploited by the Taipei prostitute, which is mentioned in this case. In any event, rethinking modernity with recourse to traditional sources has proven extremely fruitful for my research in recent years. It provides a line of flight from the truism of liberal, conservative, or radical positions. This is pretty much what I have to say today. Those of you who would like to learn more can go to the following website, okay, to acquire the books. You might find other publications that interest you. Thank you for listening.